How should I begin? For what I am about to explain may take you by surprise, may awaken alive your very soul, and terrified as is mine now. It began like any ordinary day, and yet, in all honesty, I knew this not to be true, as the night before I had been disturbed by a strange and deadly spirit. And as I watched the day pass, and slow the sun descended beyond the horizon, as darkness prevailed upon this earth, I began to feel a chill run down my whole body. For as a child, I was afraid of the dark, the unknown, and yet now, an adult, I had grown out of such fears. But now they had come back to haunt me, to fill me full of dread and terror. I boiled some water and added it to some milk and took it to my quilted bed. Sitting there, I was not sure what I was waiting for. Some uninvited guest, perhaps. And yet, why do I wait? For in truth, I do not wish him to enter, for then I would have no control upon my world. But it was not a choice, as much as I wanted to drift into sleep, to feel tired and forget. I could not. I was transfixed by this very fear that I would again fall victim to the spirit that visited me yesterday night. I stared at the hand of the clock, hoping its rhythm would send me asleep. I took to the window and opened back the curtains to see the world quiet and peaceful. A slight wind drew past me and made me shudder. For 1 minute, I thought it was them, that they had entered, and my nightmare was to begin. But it was simply the silky wind breezing by. I walked down the long corridor and down the stairs in complete darkness, almost hoping these things, these ghosts, would arrive, and then this waiting game would be over. But all the encouragement I gave them came to naught. And so I returned to bed and lay down facing the ceiling. I finally wandered off to sleep. I awoke in the next morning to the sound of the early chirping of the birds that often do sing their very own hearts out in the brisk mornings of May. And I felt relieved that my fears had been put to rest. My throat was dry, as if I had slept 1,000,000 years. But checking my watch, I found that it had only been 5 hours, and now was midday. I looked across to my tape recorder. That was odd, I thought. It was a recording, and yet I don't remember doing that. Maybe I did it whilst I was asleep, as you often hear of people walking in their sleep, even driving and doing all sorts of things. So it was no great leap of imagination that one could assume I turned it on myself. Outside, a light rained and began to descend, and the clouds covered the sky, and my room suddenly became a little darker, and I felt suffocated by this very gloom of the weather. For truly, it was not the weather that had my throat tight with fear. It is what I heard next from the tape recorder. I had rewound it and started it to play, expecting to hear some light and entertaining music, but this was not what I heard. It was a crackling sound, and the sound of me as I snored. It had been taping all night, and yet the tape was not that long. But as I forwarded it, it seemed as if the tape was as long as the time I'd slept. But how could that be? The rain fell a little harder, and it became difficult to hear the sounds from the tape. All I could hear was snoring and crackling. And then it spoke. I heard in the distance the voice of a child, speaking some kind of riddle. The voice was husky but sweet. My whole body was shocked to its core. I could feel my heart beating in my ears. What was I hearing upon this tape? What in God's name was this sound? For I had been alone in the room that night, and yet as the tape played back my very own snoring, a voice of a child was heard, speaking, but to whom? To me, perhaps. As the tape was not started by me, for whom was it started? For my benefit? So that as I slept I would know that I had once again been visited by these spirits, these ghosts that had awoken me from the dead earth. Why am I being told of this? Why does this child have to say to me? I rewound the tape back and turned it full volume, so I could try to hear these very words that were spoken. Sometimes the words seemed as if in a different language or dialect, and were hard to distinguish, as if they were coming from far away. I heard the girl say, "It's dark down here," and the words, "Help me," and "You," and the most disturbing of words, "Kill." In between the words I cannot make out. It lasted about 5 seconds. I left the tape playing, fearing there would be more. What also worried me was that not all the words sounded like they came from the first voice I heard. I sat on my bed in broad daylight, sweat like the rain that trickled down on my window, yet I could hear no sound. My senses were set on the tape recorder at the end of the room, and with a thud the tape stopped, and I jumped out of my skin with the shrill of the fear that I was in, as if the dead girl from the tape had appeared before me. But it was only the innocent noise of the tape reaching its end. I sat there for some time, not knowing what to do. My very world was being thrown on its head like a child in a dark forest, where the light was being extinguished, and all around I was becoming lost.